I'm Harriet. I'm the collections assistant at Reading Museum, which is the local town museum for Reading. And today I want to talk about a project that we did called Reading Festival is Rubbish. It was a community-led contemporary collecting project where we worked with a group of young people to curate a collection of rubbish left behind from the 2021 Reading Festival. And our aims with this were kind of to explore narratives around festival waste, environmentalism in the music industry, and attitudes around young people's relationship with climate activism. Um, so, just a very brief overview. In 2021, the Warren and District Residents Association offered to donate material they'd collected after that year's Reading Festival. So, they're a local group who regularly work with Festival Republic on their cleanup scheme. And our community curator, Brendan Carr, was able to go to one of the cleanup sessions and collect material left behind by the artists backstage, which was also supplemented by the material provided by the stage manager. The museum was given around 120 objects, probably more than that, to be honest, if you count all the crisp packets, etc. And it was really just bags that had been collected. So bags of rubbish, single-use plastics, fast disposable fashion, cosmetics, camping equipment. We have an entire tent, food and drink. There was a plastic Kinder Egg container with an empty baggie in it. COVID-19 tests. The list goes on. So that was one part of the material. And then we also had the backstage material. So this was collected from the artists. So set lists that had been used on stage with artist footprints on it, a stage towel with genuine young blood sweat on it, which was delightful. And the young people we were working with loved that. Broken drumsticks, an open packet of guitar strings, things like that. So once these were in the museum, they were kind of in a period of limbo for a bit. They weren't accessioned into the collections, they weren't stored with our collections. Because on the one hand, it was just a pile of rubbish, and there were very practical collections care-based concerns about adding it to our collection. Things like pest risks, contamination risks, preservation concerns about the type of materials. And there were also questions about sort of value and how its worth could be decided, and asking how much value is there really in collecting a mass-produced crisp packet for the permanent collection? How closely does it relate to our collection criteria, etc., etc. So at this point, enter our youth panel. So our youth panel is part of Museums Partnerships Reading's youth program. The MPR is an NPO, a national portfolio organisation supported by the Arts Council, and it's a collaboration between Reading Museum and the Museum of English Rural Life. And as part of this, we have a youth panel, which is a group of young people aged between 14 and 18 years old. And they meet roughly once a month to work on a variety of projects across both museums. So we kind of alternate the projects between the two museums. One of the things this panel is intended to do is to give young people practical experience behind the scenes in museums. And so this seemed like the perfect opportunity to introduce them to curatorial work and kind of look behind the curtain at how decisions are made about which objects we keep and which objects we don't. So the result of this was actually a pop-up exhibition. The young people, we kind of said to the young people, even like, do you want to do this project? There was no, the way we do it is we always have a variety of projects that we can run. So we were like, is this interesting to you? Do you want to engage with this, or is it not? And if they'd said no, that would have been a very valid response. But what they decided to do was run a pop-up exhibition. So they chose what objects to display, helped to make the labels, set the exhibition up, and sort of were there on the day. It was for one day only in Reading Museum. And they were there to kind of engage visitors, raise awareness of the issues, and get them involved in a dialogue about what they were talking about. And finally, some of the collections were accessioned into our permanent collection. So this material was selected by the young people in dialogue with the curators. And it was then added to the collection, and the rest of the material was disposed of in the normal ways that these things would be dealt with. So looking at this project from a contemporary collecting perspective, and just briefly why it was important. Obviously, the climate crisis is a very big concern currently, and for our institution in particular. Reading Borough Council, which runs the museum, declared a climate emergency in 2019. And as a museum, we've specifically committed to engaging with environmental concerns. I've put a quote there from our forward plan. We are a town museum. We tell the story of Reading, and Reading Festival is a big part of Reading's identity. And one of the main narratives around the festival is the amount of waste that it generates. most people here will probably have seen the headlines, the pictures, the drone footage of seas of tents after the festival. This kind of goes hand in hand with the rise of consumerism culture and things like environmentalism, climate activism, and particularly young people's relationship to all of this. Um, so, speaking of young people, why did we work with the youth panel on this? It kind of came down to the story that was being told and the voices that we wanted to platform and center. The narrative that we see in media around festival rubbish often centers on the laziness and irresponsibility of young people. I've put up some headlines here, some from 2021, so the year that the material was collected, and some more recent. The one that particularly stuck out to the young people is the one by the Metro in 2021, which is "This is how the generation that cares about the planet left Reading." We kind of wanted to get young people's perspective on this. And when approaching this topic, it's very easy, as demonstrated here, to take a moralizing, patronizing tone and kind of position ourselves securely as the institution talking about youth culture of today. And, you know, as a sector, we're obviously moving away from traditional, distant, supposedly neutral positionality. And I think that contemporary collecting is a really interesting vehicle for this, like as some of the earlier speakers have mentioned, because it can democratize the process from a very foundational stage. So you're not only enabling communities to interpret the collections, but to actively help shape them. So when we spoke to the young people, what did we find? Like I mentioned, we left it up to them what they wanted to do. And they decided to stage a pop-up exhibition, and as part of the planning process for that, make a selection of material that would be accessioned into our permanent collections. So there were kind of two distinct outcomes for this, but they were dealt with within the same project. As part of the acquisition element, the curators talk to them about how we make those decisions, like the acquisition group processes and the kind of things that we take into consideration. So, for example, some really disgusting, dirty rubbish might be good to make a statement in a pop-up exhibition, but it wouldn't be a good fit with our collections. Likewise, there was a whole unopened pasty that the youth panel were very interested in, to the point that they made big pasty-shaped labels for the exhibition. That's great, but obviously, for obvious reasons, we won't want it in the collection. And it was kind of explaining why and demystifying this a little bit, as opposed to coming in and saying yes to this, no to this, etc. And in terms of the shape of the exhibition, the young people were really able to drive this, and they planned it all out from the get-go. And they liked this idea of recreating a campsite. So you can tell in the middle photo there, that's what they did. The whole exhibition was made of material that had been collected during this salvage. So we had a little tent, rubbish scattered around it, camping gear, clothes, and they also had a separate stage section that was displayed like the backstage rubbish that had come from the artist. And they wanted to do that in a very classic museum way. They put it in museum cases. They did very basic labels, black text on white background, to try and create a bit of a juxtaposition between the setting and the kind of the empty plastic bottles that were being displayed there. So interestingly, while we were doing this, one of the main threads that the young people picked up on was this idea of the two groups of rubbish that were collected. So like I said, there was some from the campsite and some from the stage. And they were particularly interested in the narrative of young people's wastefulness and lack of care, etc., contrasted to the fact that half of the collection came from the artist who attended the festival. Like there were empty cans that Youngblood drank, unopened guitar strings, sort of juxtaposed next to unopened cheese pasties or cushions. So I've just put here an extract from one of the label drafts that was put together during the process, just to show the kind of thinking and the questions that they were asking. So continuing this, they questioned why the focus is always on the waste of young people who attended the festival. And they wanted to display these objects and say, what did they tell us about the lifestyle that celebrity musicians live? And sort of link it into broader narratives about how waste and extravagance is an everyday part of life for those people, and sort of ideas of responsibility and the environmental impact of celebrities and millionaires. And this was something that came out from our discussions when I think we did this project over about 6 months. This was something that picked up on the sessions, and they decided that they really wanted to foreground this in the exhibition. And finally, one of the things that they really wanted to emphasize was that they wanted to make it hopeful and have a focus on action. The concept of climate anxiety came up very early on in our discussions. Young people who've been growing up in a world that was messed up by previous generations and sort of the burden of that being placed on their shoulders, the idea of doom scrolling, social media. And they were really, really sure that they didn't want to feed into that kind of narrative and they wanted to try and actively combat it. So what they did was they interviewed a local councillor, Karen Rowland, about how young people could get involved and get their ideas heard. And they also interviewed a local residents group, the one who collected the material, and reached out to Festival Republic. And from that, we put together a short video of the interview footage and footage from Festival Republic that was played in the museum during the exhibition. They also had a section with campaigns that people could get involved with, things like petitions that people could sign, and a feedback area to collect people's ideas for change with a badge making station, because everyone loves a badge making station. Um, so onto the collecting bit. We had this resulted in 46 objects being added to the permanent collection. I've just put a screenshot from modes there to give you an idea and some of the record shots. And like I said, this was done very much in dialogue between the curators and the young people. And what was really important was that we wanted to document that dialogue as we went along. So in the normal way that when we're accessioning things, we put in the justification, we wanted to really make sure that the young people's voices not only were heard while we were having the discussion, but were actually documented for future for the museum collections.